Great, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning and talk about this, I think, important food safety and public health topic. And I want to just review a couple key concepts that were partly highlighted in this, in the definitions there. But zero tolerance is actually not the same as zero risk. Zero tolerance is no hazard defined by a unit of test that we're looking for the hazard in. And a hazard is not the same as a risk. Risk involves the hazard in some context of exposure, and those two come together. And so we can really look at a hazard as a component in a dynamic system of risk. And I think one of the discussion points that we want to get in today is that regulating the component, the hazard, may not be the best way to improve the overall performance of the system. And I want to highlight those concepts with some examples looking at ground beef and salmonella in ground beef. And I've been working on a project in conjunction with the National School Lunch Program that's managed by the Agricultural Marketing Service at USDA. And from 2011 to 2014, they analyzed data coming through their system, and they have a purchasing criteria for ground beef for the school lunch program that specifies it has to be free of salmonella. And from 2011 to 2014, that was operationalized as being the absence of salmonella in 25-gram samples that were being tested. And they got just under 1% of those samples turning positive, and those lots were then rejected from the program. In 2015, their sampling program changed, and it was now 0 in 325-gram samples of ground beef that they were looking at. And they, as you might expect, had a higher rate of positivity. About 1.4% of the lots being tested were turning out to be positive. The implication of that, from my perspective, is that from 2011 to 2014, there were salmonella-contaminated lots which were moving through the system that were being missed because of the testing requirements. However, throughout this time period, there's no evidence of illness associated with the ground beef being distributed through the school lunch program. And in fact, the school lunch program really, the purchase program relies heavily on process controls as measured through indicators to guarantee the safety of the product, not the pathogen testing itself. And so when we look at these positive samples, this is data from FSIS that has done some enumeration work looking at salmonella in ground beef. And the vast majority of salmonella positives that are being detected throughout this time frame are positive at really low levels, 87% with enumeration data less than 1 per 25 grams of product. So that suggests that even the positive samples that are being picked up are being positive at very low levels. And that translates directly into the risk of illness. This is some data from a risk assessment that my colleague Fernando Sampedro and I worked on looking at ground turkey and salmonella. And we can see that as the level of positivity as measured by enumeration goes up, the risk of illness goes up, the risk of detecting an outbreak goes up. So it's really clear that when we want to look at what the risk of illness is, either on an individual level or on a population level, knowing how much of the hazard is present in the commodity is tremendously important. So that allows us then to really look at what these zero tolerance policies actually do. And because the numerator has a 0 in it, it creates this false narrative that the hazard can be effectively banned from the product. And in fact, the unit of the test size creates a level of risk that will be tolerated without explicitly acknowledging that tolerance. And because if you get a positive finding, it has implications from a regulatory standpoint. It discourages testing that could be an important part of managing the risks. And so explicitly accepting performance standard tolerance levels can foster transparency and provide more options for managing the system, and I think ultimately improve the safety and the public health benefits associated with that product. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague.